Morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Morning. Give folks one more minute. Miss Hanover. Well, Ms. Scott, I guess we're gonna go ahead and get started. We'll see if others join us and see if we have a quorum.
All right, hold on 1 second. Let me get to the right form. Okay. Town of Ashland. Miss Amos. Charles City County Vice Chair Adams.
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Mitchell. Chesterfield County, Miss Smith.
Here.
Mr. Banuelos. Goochland County, Mr. Goyne.
Here.
Mr. Coleman. Hanover County, Mr. Vadunez. Mr. Hardman. Henrico County, Miss Smidler.
Here.
Mr. Yor. New Kent County, Miss Inman.
Here.
Miss Leduc. Powhatan County, Mr. Shardine. City of Richmond, Miss Chair Clark.
Here.
Thank you. Capital Region Airport Commission, Mr. Rutledge. DRPT, Ms. Dubinsky. Mr. Hudson. GRTC, Ms. Robinson.
Here.
Mr. Robinson.
Here.
Plan RBA, Mr. Bushing.
Here.
Mr. Ariel.
Here.
Thank you. RMTA, Ms. Simmons. VDOT, Ms. Rhodes.
Here. Good morning.
Good morning. Ms. Mueller. Bride Finders, Mr. O'Keefe.
Here.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call for attendance. We do have a quorum and we have a couple other members that I will move over now.
Thank you. All right, moving on to the next item. Item 3, consideration of amendments to the meeting agenda. I do think we have a amendment for consideration. Miles?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, we have a request from VDOT for an existing project, the Route 1 intersection improvements at Hopkins Road and Harwood Road. This would be a request for additional funding. In general, we would have put this on next month's agenda, but this is a time-sensitive request that needs to get on the September Policy Board agenda. So we're asking the TAC to amend the agenda today to add it as item 8. So it'd be the second action item on the agenda.
Okay. Do we have a motion to accept this amendment to the agenda?
So move.
Second, Sharon.
Thank you, been second and motion and second. I guess we could do a voice vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Awesome, thank you. That item has been added after item 7 and to be item 8. We'll push all the rest of them down. All right. Item 4, approval of the June 11th, 2024 TAC meeting minutes. Is there a motion for approval?
It's John O'Keefe. I'll make a motion for approval for the TAC minutes from last month.
Thank you. Second, any seconds?
Second, Barb.
Thanks, Barb. All right, motion and second. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, please say nay. Thank you. Moving on to item 5, open public comment period. Ms. Scott, do we have anyone signed up in person or virtually to speak?
No, ma'am, we haven't received any requests.
Oh, no. All right, I'm just kidding. That's our usual. Got to get people involved, maybe. All right, TAC Chairman's report. Welcome, everyone. Now I'm the chair of the RRTPO TAC. So please excuse me if I get any acronyms mixed up. I'm getting accustomed to this new role. And excited for the TPO and being more involved in the programs and processes on this end. So thanks everyone for allowing the rotation to come on to my end. And I want to also welcome my co-chair, Ms. Adams. All right. Item 7, FY24 Transportation Improvement Program Amendment. This is along the lines of what the amendment was. So we have 2 of those items. And so I think the first item is Ramos. Is it Miss? Who's that? Oh, Carrie. Gotcha. So Carrie, that's your first item. Would you go ahead and present that, please?
Awesome. Thank you, Chair Clark. I just want to make sure everybody can hear me and see my screen. It should be the same
No
tag.
screen.
No screen? Okay. I will reshare it. Can we see?
Yes.
Yes. Perfect. Okay. Awesome. So thank you, everybody. I back up a little bit. So I just want to present some of the new 5310 projects that we have. These are going to be relatively small projects. That's why they are all grouped into one presentation. That doesn't mean their impact is small, though. So background, Transportation Improvement Program, the TIP, plans, investments, and federal obligations for the next 4 years. DRPT has made the request to add 5 new projects for the TIP, CCSB 01, CCSB 02, HHI 001, 0001, sorry, SOAR 001, and GRTC 100. The new projects require amendment because of fiscal constraint, conformity review, public review, and RRTPO approval. So for the first project, Heart Havens Hands, Inc., they received a grant from the FTA Section 5310 program to buy 2 9-passenger vans with handicap accessible lifts. The purpose is to improve community integration by providing safe transportation for individuals with developmental disabilities in Richmond. It is inside of the former 8-hour ozone maintenance, but it is classified as exempt. Overall, the total for this project is $173,975. The FTA has provided $139,000 and $80. Local has provided $34,795. Yeah. And then the second project is from GRTC. It is funded by the same program as the first one to continue its travel training program for seniors and individuals with disabilities. The objective is to provide safe and independent travel across the Richmond region for work, school, healthcare, and community activities. It is also inside the former ozone maintenance area, but it is also classified as exempt. In total, it's going to be $75,000. $37,500 is from the FTA, $30,000 is from the state, and $7,500 is from local. So SOAR's project also received the same funding, and it's funding to replace on-body vehicles with lifts for modified 5-passenger minivans with ramps. The objective is to enhance transportation for individuals with disabilities to support access to jobs through the supported employment program and promote independent and productive lives. Again, it is also in the 8-hour ozone area. However, it is also classified as exempt. The funding for this is going to be $390,000 $9,215 in total. And then from the FTA, we are getting $247,372. And then local is funding $61,843. Okay. And then finally, these two projects are grouped together because they are so closely tied. They're both from the Chesterfield Community Board Services. They received funding from the FTA as part of the same funding program as I've mentioned before, the 5310, to acquire a 15-passenger van with wheelchair lifts and replacement tablets with mounting equipment for trip planning software. The objective is to improve transportation for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities and mental illness to enhance access to employment, community integration, and social programs. It is also in the 8-hour ozone maintenance area and is classified as exempt. CCSB 001 is in total $921,175. From the FTA, we are getting $96,940. And from local, we are getting the remaining $24,235. CCSB 002 is in total $28,482. And then federally, we are getting from the FTA again, $22,789. And then from the state, we are getting $4,557. And in local funding, we are getting the remaining $1,139. We are requesting, or we are saying that you guys should recommend approval. If anyone has any comments, questions, or concerns, please let me know. I can either try to answer them or point you in the right direction.
Do we have any questions for Carrie? I just have one question, actually, regarding Heart Havens and SOAR 365, and maybe it's for Tiffany. So I know typically, does the state not provide any match for them in those capital purchases?
I'm not, sorry, you go, Tiffany.
Because I heard she asked that. For the case in terms of these, both of them were related to capital. I believe it's just only the federal and local. I don't know if there's always a state match in there because we already provide the federal match or the match to the 5310. So there is an additional funding that they apply for in state like they would for some of our other capital programs. So like you're familiar that if it like GRTC came in for a capital purchase, typically they would have some of their federal funds and we provide state. But for 5310, because we are kind of the administering agency, there isn't typically a state match unless they have requested it. So in this case, it was just the federal and then the local match.
Yeah, and I was thinking that they missed that window. But which localities are those two located in?
I can tell you as much. I would have to look into that one as much. I don't remember, but they're all within the Richmond region.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to know because I know potentially if we could have helped apply, those are some hefty matches. I think $64,000 to me is a big match. And then a large entity like GRTC has like 7,500 match. You know, I think it's. But anyway, that was just an observation. And I was just wondering. So, do we have a motion to approve these STIP amendments? This is really integrating federal and state money into the program. And they should be added so that these people can purchase the things that Carrie went over.
I'll make a motion. This is Barb to recommend approval of the TIP amendments as requested by DRPT.
I'll second the motion.
Thank you. Second and so moved. Can we get a roll call vote, please?
Yes, ma'am. Let's see. Vice Chair Adams,
Aye.
Ms. Smith,
Aye.
Mr. Goin,
Aye.
Ms. Smidler,
Aye.
Ms. Inman.
Aye.
Chair Clark,
Aye.
Ms. Dubinsky,
Aye.
Ms. Robinson,
Sorry, aye.
Thank you. Mr. Bushing,
Aye.
Mr. O'Keefe,
Aye.
and Ms. Rhodes.
Aye.
Thank you. That motion carries.
Thank you. Moving on to the newly added item, and Ms. Scott, could you, okay, great, see Mark is over. And so Miles or Mark, do you want to take over? Mark, do you want to talk about this TIP amendment? I'm sorry, this request for funding. And it's partly City of Richmond, so I'll be probably chiming in. I think we have some staff on as well.
Sure. So just a very quick high-level overview. We have a project in the city, 15955, that has been advertised 3 times. At this point, the bids that have come in are significantly higher than the allocations on the project. And while we have some support for closing that gap, we're trying to close the last of the gap so that we can actually award the project. So the request through the City of Richmond and VDOT as the administrator of the project to see if the TPO would be willing to increase the commitment they have to this project already to get it to a point where we can award the project. It would go before the CTB in September, mid-September, for actual award. And we've got support from our central office that if there is support from TAC at this point, they will keep it on the track for awarding, with the understanding that final approval would need to come from the TPO at their September 5th meeting. I know we also have other folks online as well, and Sarah has more details as well, if anybody has any questions.
So the shortfall is approximately $1,084,000, give or take. And I don't know if we have that up to show.
I can share that. Just one moment. I'll pull that slide up. So I think this table, Madam Chair, shows the previous total, current allocations, and proposed additional allocation.
And I can speak to the project history a bit more. This project actually began in 1997, so it's been on the books for a minute. After almost 25 years, we are at a place where it's been advertised. So it first went out to advertisement. You guys may recall last summer, actually, additional CMAQ was put on the project. We thought that would be the last amount of funding needed to get the project bids awarded. Unfortunately, the project was bid in December of 2023. No bids were received. The project was re-advertised in February 2024 with a significant increase and having received only 1 bid. So we, at the advice of the executive leadership and central office, we advertised it one last time, a third time in June 2024, and bids were received last week. It was the same bidder that had previously bid on the project with a $300,000 increase on how they bid. And so much of that, as you can see from Miles's chart, is attributed to betterment, but we do have an overall shortfall of $1,084,000. So we have bids in hand at this time, and given this project's longevity and history, we are hoping to find the additional funding to put this on this project and get this project out the door. VDOT is administering the project, but we have support, and the request is being done in partnership with the City of Richmond.
Madam Chair, if I might add just a little bit from the MPO side, just for everyone's awareness, we do have funding in balance entry in previous years. So either surplus funding that hasn't been allocated yet or closeout from other projects that could cover this request. So this could be achieved without any impact to other funding, any other projects funding. The other thing I did just want to highlight for TAC as a reminder is that we have been for the past few years pretty focused on getting these legacy projects off the books. So that is just to reiterate, this is a 5-digit UPC, 1997. So this is just another one of those that we're trying to get closed out. But I will stop there, and it looks like we have questions.
Yep. Ms. Smith? Okay.
I'm definitely in support of transferring additional funding to the project so that it can be awarded. I was just curious though, what is the scope of the project?
Yeah, I should have explained that. Yeah, we have about 0.42 miles of Route 1 that is being reconstructed to a different, slightly different typical. It's still 4 lanes, but there will be better stormwater management. We're also adding sidewalk along that component, that portion of the corridor. And then the main safety component of the project is a realignment of Harwood and there's another H name, forgive me. Harwood and Hopkins. Yes, Harwood and Hopkins. There's a realignment. It's not so harsh a realignment that they would be at right angles, but the process is to realign the roadways so that the crossing of Route 1 at those locations is safer, and that more specifically coming off Route 1 onto those streets is a safer movement.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds good. The re-advertisement just, costs always go up. It doesn't ever seem like re-advertising gets you a lower cost. And no scope changes between those advertisements. Same project all 3 times.
So transportation scope, no changes. There were some refinements in the stormwater management piece and trying to maybe mitigate some impacts, but it's still a sidewalk, still the realignment, still the stormwater management.
And changes in project duration or liquidated damages, anything like that?
Not to my knowledge, Barb.
All right, thanks.
Any other questions? Hearing none, we'll entertain a motion for approval of the use of, is it CMAC?
Yep.
Funds to fund the balance request of 1.84443.
So moved.
Project. Thank you, Sarah. Do you have a second?
Second, Barb.
Thank you. Let's do a roll call.
Vice Chair Adams,
Aye.
Ms. Smith,
Aye.
Mr. Goin,
Aye.
Ms. Smidler. Aye. Ms. Inman,
Aye.
Chair Clark,
Aye.
Ms. Dubinsky,
Aye.
Ms. Robinson,
Aye.
Mr. Bushing,
Aye.
Mr. O'Keefe,
Aye.
and Ms. Rhodes.
Aye, and thank you.
Thank you. That motion carries.
Thank you, everyone. Moving on to item 9, functional classification update, which is an action item. Mr. Bushing.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we're moving away from funding somewhat. So this is the functional classification update. Just as a refresher for everyone, functional classification is basically the grouping of roadways based on the service that they provide to the overall transportation network. This is a federal requirement. It's been a requirement since the 70s, so there's federal guidance, but at the end of the day, this is a VDOT responsibility to designate the roads into the functional classifications. As we all know, the arterials, the collectors. The maps that come out of that process are only reviewed once a decade. So after each census, that's the major update. We do minor changes for individual roadways throughout the time period, but there's only one review wholesale per decade. And so with this process, VDOT prepares the draft maps, and then the MPOs review and approve those and submit a resolution supporting the changes. So that's the overall process. So it's collaborative between VDOT and the MPO. We sent these maps back out to you in April and May for any review and comments. Staff have also been reviewing them internally. We only received one comment at the time, and that was a request from Charles City and New Kent to consider Route 106, which is a minor arterial, being upgraded to a principal arterial. So that was the only request that we received at the time. Just as a little bit more of a overview of functional classification, it touches sort of everything that we do in the transportation world. So in the funding side, functional classification helps determine which projects are regional in character and which ones are considered local or programmatic from the MPO standpoint. It determines which roadways get included in our travel demand modeling. It also impacts our air quality planning. So we're looking primarily at the arterials for that process. On the funding side, functional classification determines which roadways are eligible for federal funds, and then more regionally for the CVTA regional dollars. It also has a role in determining maintenance payments. Looking at design, the design standards vary by the class of the roadway, access management standards. Certain roadways are eligible for traffic calming and some aren't. So there's different design elements that are impacted. And then operations, things such as the maintenance inspection schedule or parking prohibitions are also related to functional classification. So you can see it kind of touches a broad swath of what we do in the transportation world. And this isn't everything, but this was just trying to provide a quick snapshot of some of the major things. So what are the changes that we're looking at here? The map that I sent out was an ArcGIS map, and it was attached to the agenda item. But this image on the screen really shows the key changes. Primarily, what's being revised this time around is adding interchanges and segments that might have been missed last time. So it's all the ramps and the collector distributor roads that might not have all been captured last time. The one major change on here is Route 1. It's this red line at the top. So this is an upgrade of Route 1 and 54 in Hanover and Ashland from a minor arterial to an other principal arterial. And that's really reflecting the investments that the MPO has made in Route 1 through the town of Ashland to add the turn lanes and increase the through capacity up there. So this would then basically extend the principal arterial all the way up to the 54 England Street and then over to the 95 on-ramps. And then there's some smaller changes that we're addressing, like stubs or errors. So some of those are like, you may be aware of these in your locality already, where it's a divided highway, and on one side of the road it has a functional class, and then there's a stretch that just wasn't included in the mapping last time on the other side of the roadway. So fixing some of those issues. So those are the principal changes that are being made. So the request today is for the TAC to review the proposed updates and provide a recommendation of approval to the policy board. And then if there are any other questions or concerns, we will take those to VDOT before the policy board meeting, so we can make sure that we have an answer for those for that meeting as well. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. And I think Sarah is also prepared to step in where I might not know the answer.
Madam Chair, I have a question. Miles, if you could go back to the last slide. I saw a red line. I'm not sure if that's new principal arterial in Henrico inside 295. I was wondering what road that is. I'm trying to go in on Google Maps now, but
so there's a link in the agenda and I can pull it up, but that section, if I remember correctly, there was just a gap where it was not connecting to the actual ramp.
Okay.
That wasn't included in the previous map, and I can pull up the map.
Okay. Thank you for reminding me about the map in the agenda, and I will zoom in and thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? All right, hearing none. Miles, do you want to state, do you have the summary of the, perfect.
This is the slide you're looking for, Madam Chair?
It is, and I'm just sorry, I was just reading over it. So for the motion, we're asking to provide a recommendation of approval to the policy board of the proposed updates to the roadway functional classifications. is there any motion from the TAC to move this to the policy board, which staff will be reviewing any of those requests with VDOT before the policy board if there's any issues about the proposed updates?
This is Austin. I'll move approval of the roadway functional classifications as presented.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
John O'Keefe, I'll second.
Thank you. Then second and in motion and second. This morning I've been backwards all day. Let's do a roll call vote, please.
Madam Chair, before we do a roll call vote, I just noticed
I'm
one
sorry,
thing.
Sharon.
Sorry. I noticed the red in Henrico that was when I zoomed in on the linked map, it says Settlers Road or something. Maybe I'm incorrect just looking at it quickly, but it's actually Airport Drive. So I don't have an issue with the class. I was just wanted to maybe clarify and we could look into offline just that the road is named correctly on the maps. And I can talk offline about that.
Yeah, Sharon, you and I can find a few minutes and I'll see if I can get that corrected. I'm sure it's just a GIS error.
Thank you.
Any further discussion or questions? Hearing none, Ms. Scott.
Thank you. 1 second. We have Miss Amos who has joined us. I'm moving her over as panelist now. And Vice Chair Adams,
Aye.
Ms. Smith,
Aye.
Mr. Goyne,
Aye.
Ms. Smidler,
Aye.
Ms. Inman,
Aye.
Chair Clark,
Aye.
Ms. Dubinsky,
Aye.
Ms. Robinson,
Aye.
Mr. Bushing,
Aye.
Mr. O'Keefe,
Aye.
Ms. Rhodes,
Aye.
Ms. Amos. I know that you're in the webinar now. I'm not sure if you were present long enough to hear that presentation and wanted to vote on this matter, or if you will wait until the next.
I was, aye.
Thank you. That motion carries.
Awesome. All right, moving on to item 10, pathways to the future. Salu, do you want to go ahead and present that item? I know you
Yes,
presented it over the last meetings, but did you have any summary for today?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, members of the TAC. So let me just share my screen first. Is everybody able to see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to present the pathways to the future. It is basically a continuation of the presentation I provided last time in the last TAC meeting. So we have basically divided the process into 3 phases, actually 4 phases, in which we are completing 3 phases this time, and the 4th phase is basically for the future. So I basically talked about the 1st and the 2nd phase during my presentation last month, and I'll continue my presentation today, but I'll provide you a little bit of recap so we all are on the same page. So the pathways to the future is the first exploratory scenario planning, comprehensive scenario planning process for the Richmond region. The project was over 2 years, almost around 2 years. We started around December of 2022. We had a scenario planning advisory committee who guided this process. We had 6 meetings with them. We had 2 phases of public engagements. And then we presented to the TAC last month. I'm going to present today as well and ask for TAC's approval. And if TAC recommends the process, I'm going to the policy board next month. So the basic framework is that we have the region today, and we develop what is called as the forces of change or drivers or disruptors based on public input, based on the SPAC input, as well as based on what we thought would be good based on staff as well as SPAC's discussion. Then based on those forces of changes, we develop different scenarios, we model different scenarios, and then based on the outcome of the future, outcome of these scenarios, we get to know what would be the informed decision which we can have for tomorrow. This process doesn't give us a preferred scenario. It's just looking at different futures so that we can get prepared. So the process flow is basically, as I mentioned, 3 phases. The first was the development of data and model tools. The second phase was basically developing the scenarios, identifying disruptors, developing the performance measures, and basically finalizing the narration of the scenarios which we developed. The third phase, which I'll be talking about today, is basically running those scenarios and then evaluating them. And then the final phase, which is for the future, is application of the outcome of this process for different program areas in Plan RVA. So that's for the future. It's not covered in this Pathways to the Future process. And I talked about this last time. So basic aim was to find what would be the disruptors or drivers or forces of future change that could change our trends in the future. And we had 4 buckets of them, like community, technology, economy, and resiliency. And within each of those buckets, we had sub buckets, which I described yesterday. Last month. And then finally, we came up with these 5 scenarios, baseline, which was basically the trend line projections. And then we had 2 high growth scenarios, Back to Future Utopia, and then one same as baseline scenario, but different growth pattern, May and Safe, and then one a little bit low growth scenario compared to baseline, which we are calling RVS Sinks. So I'm going to go into a little bit detail into all of these 4 scenarios. Talking with them in comparison with the 4 buckets of the drivers which we had discussed previously. So the baseline is basically the trend line, which is we can say that the growth is mostly in the suburban areas. We see a little bit of densification of the urban cores, and the trends and the settlement is basically based on what the localities have adopted in their comprehensive plan. So we can see that the population growth is gaining. The settlement demand, it's towards more dense, but it's towards still on the side of the less density. Settlement demand, its supply is towards the middle between greenfield and infill, and the state, local, and federal policies about the status quo of what we see now. Technology-wise, there's more adoption of electric vehicles and connected and automated vehicles. Mode shift, a little bit towards the multimodal side, but we still maintain what we have now. And the other technology is status quo of what is now. For economy, we see a little bit of economic gain, both in the growth of the economy as well as the overall number of employment. As we see a little bit of telework during COVID, I think it's still towards the traditional size. That's what we are projecting. That might change, but that's what we are projecting for the baseline. And then the industry shift is basically what we have now. Climate change is a little bit towards the mitigated side, but it's mostly around the status quo, what we have now, and environmental policies towards the green side, and the local individual response is what we see now, the status quo. So we have this for all the different scenarios. For Back to Future, the growth primarily is in suburban area and rural areas, so mostly single family, care-centric housing. So the reaction is reactive to global change rather than proactive. So obviously, this is a high growth scenario. So population growth is obviously high. The settlement demand is more towards the less single family kind of household rather than the high density. Obviously, the settlement supply goes with that, so more of a greenfield development rather than infill development. And the federal, state, and local policy is very supportive. Technology-wise, it's lesser than the baseline for adoption of EVs and CAVs. Again, more of a single mode, as the name suggests, back to the future rather than the multimodal future. And for other technology, it's more of a conventional rather than the advanced. Economy-wise, it's growing because population, employment, both of them are growing. Workforce, we can see that it's more towards the traditional side rather than the telework side. And then the industry shift is similar to what we see now and similar to baseline. Climate impacts, it's increased. It's lesser than the status quo. Environmental policy, conventional rather than the green. And then the local individual response is regressive rather than the status quo, which we see in the baseline. The third one is the Ecotopia, which has a dense housing. We see a lot of climate refugees coming to the Richmond region, more transportation choices, low carbon footprint, and a more proactive response to the global change rather than the reactive responses which we saw in Back to the Future. So population, supply and demand wise, it's both high population growth. Same goes with the settlement demand, and obviously it's a high dense development, so it's towards the infill, and the local, state, and federal policy is supportive, very much supportive, rather than the restrictive ones which we saw in Back to Futures. So more adoptions of EAVs, CAVs, as this is a low carbon footprint scenario, multimodal shift to transportation, advanced technologies, employment. It's similar to Back to Future, more employment because it's a high growth scenario, but more of a telework scenario rather than the traditional going to office scenario, which we saw in Back to Future. And industry shift, also a lot of added industries rather than just maintaining what we have. Resiliency wise, we see the climate impacts would be mitigated, environmental policies totally green, and the local individual response is very much proactive. And then finally, not finally, the second last scenario is May and safe scenario. So it's basically growth is similar to baseline, but mostly in core and infill development. So it's the response is hyperlocal. So there's a mixture of proactive and reactive responses to global changes. Though there's more transportation choices in this scenario compared to baseline. So population growth is similar to baseline. The control total is almost same to baseline. So it's obviously growing. Settlement demand is towards the mixed side. The demand is mixed. The settlement supply is towards the infill because it's more denser, and it's the local, state, and federal policy is more supportive here. Technology-wise, it's more adaptive of the EVs, CAVs than compared to baseline. The multimodal shift is a little bit towards the transportation shift is towards the multimodal side, and again, the other technology is also towards the advanced side. Economy-wise, it's similar to baseline in which it's growing. The workforce is mixed, so it's between the traditional actually going to the office rather than teleworking. It's towards the mix, and then the industry shifts is also to maintain what it is now. Climate change, a little bit towards the mitigated side, environmental policy towards the green side, and then local individual response, a little bit on the proactive side, but depends on the locality. It could be both reactive and proactive depending on different localities. And then we have the final scenario, which is the RVA sinks. So it's basically based on man-made as well as natural disasters, causing the region not to recover fully in time. there's a lack of affordable housing, and there's a lot of people leaving the region because of the unavailability of housing and jobs. So population growth, it's growing from what it is now, but it's lesser than all the scenarios, including the baseline. The settlement demand is similar, what it is now. Supply is also similar. The policy is very much restrictive rather than supportive. Technology-wise, there's a less adoption of the EVs and CAVs. More shift a little bit towards the multimodal side, and then other technology is basically conventional. Economy side, it's a little bit growing, again, not to around the baseline or other scenarios. The global national economy towards, since it's a low growth scenario, we are assuming a kind of a dystopian future, so it's towards the recession. The workforce is more traditional, and then the industry shifts. As the scenario itself says, there's a loss of industries in this scenario. Climate impacts, a lot of climate impacts, as there's a lot of, we assume sea level rise, environmental policies, conventional, and then the response is regressive. So those were our 5 scenarios. So now once we have these scenarios, which are basically what we have is a qualitative information. The next step, the difficult one, is to model these scenarios. And for that, we need quantitative information. Not everything which I talked about can be modeled, but we basically developed 2 different levers so that we can model these scenarios. So the primary levers were growth, obviously, so or decline, as well as the special distribution, where we are actually growing, whether it's within the core of the region, the outskirts, the suburbs. So I'll talk about that. And then obviously density is a factor. We are growing, but by how much and in what area? So those were the primary levers. And then we also looked at some of the secondary levers like conservation, like how much water and energy are we actually the consumption in each scenario, decarbonization, like the carbon reduction. Basically, it comes out from the neutrality in electricity generation. Technology is basically the adoption of CAVs. So the assumption for baseline is that 35% of all transportation would be connected in automedical vehicles. That would be the penetration rate in baseline, whereas in different scenarios like Ecotopia, it's towards 60%, Back to Future is 25%, and RVS sinks, in which we are less regressive of adopting new technology, the percentage is 50%. And then we also looked at different sea level rise. The baseline assumption is that there's going to be a 3-foot sea level rise by 2050. RVS sinks, as the name suggests, we used a 5-foot sea level rise. In Ecotopia, better climate control and policies. So sea level rise is around 2 foot. And then also we looked at the travel trip making, basically because of the density provided, there's going to be more accessibility in some of the scenarios because of the lesser trips making, because of the destinations being closer. So we looked at all those these levers, primary as well as secondary, to model the scenarios. So the basic building block for modeling the scenarios is TAZs, the translation analysis zones. If you don't know about TAZs, it's a geography which is kind of similar, I would say, to census block groups, a little bit smaller than block groups, but it is around that. It is made of census blocks. Currently, we have 875 TAZs in the Richmond region. So this is the building blocks for all modeling scenarios. And then for modeling different scenarios, we looked at different things. So basically, we looked at how we are now, like based on the density we have now for population. We looked at what we can call as the urban, suburban, and rural areas in our region. We also looked at what we can call as the inner and outer loops of our region. So the inner loop is basically areas inside Chippenham, Parham Road, and Laburnum Avenue. The outer loop is basically 288, 295, a little bit of 64, and Route 10. So those are the core areas of our region. So we could look at basically these regions. We also looked at areas in the vicinity of the outer loop, which has a lot of growth potentials, as we can see from Short Pump or Westchester Commons in Chesterfield. So those are areas which we see a lot of growth in the baseline as well. So we looked at all these areas. We also looked at the regional water and sewer service area. So those are the areas which we can say that have a potential growth based on the trend lines, because those areas always have already have that water line connection or sewer line connection there, and growth might be more easy to those. So based on all these different factors, what we did was we developed 3 different areas: primary, secondary, and tertiary, for growth allocation. So primary area is basically all the areas inside the outer loop, as I described previously. The secondary areas is areas outside the outer loop but connected to utilities. So outside the outer loop but connected to the utilities. And then the tertiary areas is everything everything which is not in the primary and the secondary. So this was the basis of our growth allocation. And then we developed scenario control totals. So basically, for high growth, I think we assume housing affordability, economic boom, flexible immigration policies, like increased survival rates because of the advancement of medical science, those kind of things were the key for high growth. Low growth was basically only one scenario, and that was on the assumption that it's going to be unaffordable housing, the anchor jobs leave, we have a tight immigration policies, low birth rate, and then global pandemic as well. Those were the main rationals behind low growth and high growth. So the medium growth, 34% population and 31% employment is what the baseline growth is, which has been approved by the RRTPO policy board. And may and safe that's the scenario which is similar to baseline. But as I mentioned, the distribution is different in may and safe than what it was in baseline, though the control total is same. The high growth scenario, Back to Future and Ecotopia, both assume that they have the twice of the migration in the Richmond region. So if you look at last 10 years for the Richmond region, if you look at the growth from 2010 to 2020, 67% of that growth was migration, which is in migration minus out migration. So people coming to this area and people leaving that area, if you subtract that difference, that comes out to be the 67% of growth in the Richmond region. And that is different for different localities. I'm just talking about Richmond region as a whole. And the remaining percent was natural growth. So 67% migration, and then 33% natural growth. So based on that assumption, what we did for the high growth scenario is we doubled the baseline migration, and then we increased the natural growth to 1.25%. So that gives a 60% population growth from what it is now, basically 2017, and 60% more employment compared to what is now from 2017. So more than what it was in the baseline. And then may and safe assumes half migration from what it was because of the housing being unaffordable, as well as the anchor jobs leaving. So it's basically half of the migration of what we expect. So it's 16% population growth and 16% employment growth. So this table shows how we allocated growth for different scenarios as compared to the baseline. So we have 3 areas: primary areas, secondary areas, and tertiary areas. So if you look at the baseline, it's obviously what it was in the baseline. But if you look at different scenarios, you can see that what area got significantly higher growth, what area got higher than baseline, and what area got lower than baseline. So if you look at Ecotopia, you can see that the primary area, which is inside I-295, 288 outer loop, it got higher, significantly higher growth. And then the secondary area still got a higher growth than what it was in baseline. The tertiary area, which is outside the outer loop and outside the connection, water sewer connection, it got like similar to baseline growth. And similarly, if we look at the back to future, the primary area got a little bit higher growth than baseline, but the major growth was in the secondary region. The May and Safe, both the primary area and secondary area got a little bit higher growth than baseline, but the tertiary area got a little bit lower growth than the baseline. When we look at RBS sinks, all the areas got significant growth lesser than the baseline, but because the overall scenario was lesser than the baseline. I see a hand, Madam Chair.
Yeah, thank you. And it's my hand. I just had a quick question. So you said that from the previous 10 years ago, we've done kind of the 60% or higher growth. So if you could go back to the one slide before this. And so then, oh wait. Yeah. And so then if we look at the high growth column, so over the last 10 years, we would have been in the high growth column. Is that what you're kind of, when you compared those two, if we would have had these types of things, not had them, but if we were looking at it from the same lens back then, and we move into looking forward, would you say that we experience high growth from the last 10 years, or would it be, you said 60 something percent, so I was thinking that was the high growth. And I'm just asking that, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so what I was mentioning was that when we break down the actual growth of the Richmond region from 2010 to 2020, those 10 years, if you actually break down the growth, so what is growth? Growth is basically birth minus death plus migration, right? So we have a natural growth, we subtract the death, and then we add the migration, which is basically in migration minus out migration. So birth minus death, that's the natural growth. That was 33% in our region. The actual from 2017 to, from 2000 to 2010 to 2020. And then 63% was the migration growth. So that is what we are assuming, that it carries over the same in our baseline. But for the high growth scenario, what we are assuming is that migration could be doubled from like what it was 63%. So let's say if the growth in the Richmond region was 10,000 in last 10 years, 6,000 was because of the migration and 4,000 was because of the natural growth. What we are saying is that if we double the migration, then the growth in that last 10 years for the next future would be 6 times 2, 12,000 would be the natural, the migrational growth. And that's what we are assuming in high growth scenarios.
Thank you. I needed that clarification.
Mm-hmm. So once we have developed those scenarios and then got the control total, now we want to evaluate those scenarios, right? So we have an integrated suite of 11 predictive models. So the land use model is the key, and then we have all the other models. I went to this, described this a little bit last time, but I won't go into the detail. But we have 11 models. The primary key is land use model. And once we have the outcome from the land use model, it goes into different models and it gives the outcome. So based on all the models, and I don't know if this is clear or not, but we have 11 predictive models, and based on that, we have almost 65 performance measures. So I won't go into details of all these, but it's in the slide and we can talk later if needed. But I'll go over a few of the performance measures which we got from different scenarios. So if you look at the mixed use, low, medium, high density households, Ecotopia and May and Safe scenario have high number, is primarily due to the focus on developing high density areas, promoting a mix of residential and commercial spaces. The low density is basically decreasing in all the four scenarios, and both the medium density as well as high density is increasing. The just for a clarification, the dark black line, that's the baseline. So this is basically comparing with the baseline. So baseline is 0, and if you go towards the bottom of the baseline, it's basically less than the baseline, and if you're going towards the top, it's higher than the baseline. So low density for all the scenarios is decreasing, whereas the mixed use, medium density, and high density, all of those are increasing in all the different scenarios. If you look at the change in vehicle miles traveled per capita, we see that Ecotopia shows a decrease of 4.97 miles per person from the baseline, while Back to Future decreases to 3.37%. May and Safe decreases by, I think, actually decreases by 1.69. And then RVS sinks, it increases by 1.7 vehicle miles traveled per capita per day. I think the rationale behind this is that both Ecotopia and May and Safe encourage shorter trips. Back to Future also shows decrease because of the comprehensive growth patterns that increases residents to not travel so far, because it's, even though it's low density, it's spread out, but still it's higher growth than the baseline. So we have that. If you look at the connected and autonomous vehicles, obviously this is different in different scenarios. For Back to Future, the penetration rate was, I think, 20%. For baseline, it was 35%, and then for Ecotopia, it's 60%. So based on that, we see more vehicles mile traveled in CAVs as the narrative defines that. If you look at the mode shift again, for drive alone and shared ride modes, Back to Future shows the maximum increase of 10 and 20% of rides, respectively. Ecotopia is 8% and 10%, respectively. Drive alone and shared ride both are highest for the Back to Future scenario, as residential growth has spurred across low to medium density areas in the suburbs, and people have to commute longer distance. I think that's the rationale. Transit, if you look at transit, increases in Ecotopia by 34%, 14% in Back to Future, and it decreases by 2% in May and Safe and 17% in RVS Sync. So transit increases, I think, significantly in Ecotopia because residential are living in high density areas and commuting shorter distances. And this is because of the sustainable growth as we had envisioned in this scenario. This is the per capita emissions. So we have the NOx, the volatile organic compounds, the PM 2.5, as well as carbon dioxide, which is the greenhouse emissions. And we can see that Ecotopia, as the scenario suggests, has reduction in all categories. May and Safe also has reduction. Back to Future and RVS Sinks both has an increase, as the name suggests. So this one is based on our economic model. So the household cost is basically just the utility cost. It doesn't take into account the mortgage cost. And travel cost is basically the mileage, the fuel cost, as well as the maintenance cost. And we can see that there's the largest reduction in travel cost in Ecotopia due to compact development and higher density. The shorter trips make that possible, as well as efficient transportation options. May and Safe also shows a decrease in travel cost. That aligns with the compact development strategy and resulting in shorter distances. I have a question, Barb.
Yeah, I was remembering from an earlier screen that the RVA sinks, all of those transportation options were negative, but the travel cost is so much higher. I'm just trying to put that together. You know, maybe 3 slides ago.
Yeah, let me go back.
Not that, not that.
Uh,
Oh, yeah.
this one?
Yeah, that one. So less driving alone, less shared ride, less transit. But then the travel cost was higher.
Yeah, that's because it's per capita rather than the whole scenario. So even though we are traveling less, the per capita cost is going high.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, and then finally, this is based on our system resiliency model. So it gives us the change in wildfire prone areas, the acreage, and then basically the population, employment, and household affected by those wildfire prone areas. So Ecotopia and Back to Future have more people and employment and household affected because of more density within those wildfire prone areas. Ecotopia wildfire prone area is decreasing, but the number of people affected is still increasing because it's more dense. So it's a kind of a mixed results in this scenario, in this category. And then this one is from our health model. So this is a pretty complex model. So it basically shows the change in mental, physical, and overall health index scores in all the 4 scenarios. So for the mental health scores, all scenarios shows negative scores relative to baseline. So it's, and I think that is attributed to the green space, which decreases in all the scenarios based on the land cover model. For the physical health index, the data suggests that the scenarios with higher CAV penetration and more sustainable urban development like the Ecotopia and Mesa tend to have better health outcomes. The differences in scenarios underscores the significant impact that the transportation choices have on public outcome. The overall health index is basically the combination of both the mental as well as the physical health index. So I think, yeah, so I don't want to go over all those 65 different performance measures. Those were a little bit of preview of all the performances. And as you know, it's looking at all those different performance measures, it was difficult to actually get a picture, whole picture. So what we thought was, rather than using all those different 65 performance measures coming out from all those different scenarios, why don't we tie those performance into some kind of index? Rather than 65, we developed these 8 indices. So healthy living index, smart growth, environmental protection, access to markets, business impacts, technological index, cost of living, and then equity index, which is basically the accessibility for the equity emphasis area. So these were the 8 indices we developed, and we basically evaluated our scenarios based on these 8 indices. So as you look at this graphic, the larger the number, the better the index is. So, and the baseline is 0. So if it's negative, it means it's worse than baseline. If it's positive, it's better than baseline. So the more the positive number, it's better. Overall, we can see that Ecotopia is a winner in most of the category, but not in all categories. Like if you look at the equitable index, May and Safe might be the better one comparable to Ecotopia. And if we look at the other after Ecotopia, it doesn't have a very clear picture. So as I talked, the equitable index, May and Safe and RBA sinks is better than Back to Future. So reflecting different things coming out of this evaluation result. But overall, looks like Ecotopia would be the overall best scenario. So once we have those when we modeled the scenario, we got the results, and then we had the evaluation done. We went to our second public engagement period. So basically, we had two things there. So one was the public survey and scenario selector exercise, in which basically we gave the public different options, and they could play with those different options and create their own scenarios. So basically come up with what would be their preferred scenarios. So that was the exercise which people performed. We had like 569 site visitors, and actually 126 people actually completed the scenario selector exercise. Then we had the second SRET, in which like 50 subject matter experts and leaders from the region, some of you also attended. We discussed the risk and the opportunities of different scenarios, and also discussed on the overall use of the scenario planning process, the pathways of future. So based on the input of the SRET as well as SPAC, we basically came up with these implications for different scenarios. So Ecotopia, as we all know, it's positive for environment. It has multimodal travel. It might be the preferred scenario, but it has risk for affordable housing. And policy-wise, we need to invest in transit, affordable housing, and some of the policies which might be needed in this kind of scenario is rent control. We might need to implement complete street and those kind of things. Back to Future, it's not the best scenario, but it has something for everyone. So and it might be the one which, looking at the status quo, have a less opposition. So the risk is basically we have car dependencies, we have the obstacles for affordable housing, high cost of living, climate change is not tackled betterly in this scenario. We need to invest in land preservation and equitable transportation system. Policies, again, inclusive zoning, mixed use centers, those kind of things is needed. May and Safe, it gives a balanced outcome. It is positive for the quality of life, congestion, accessibility, health. Though it has risks from some of the concentrated development, we need to invest in transit neighborhoods. Resiliency is much needed. Some of the policies which would be helpful in this scenario is like the inclusive zoning, the extra dueling units, revenue sharing, and concept of investment hubs. RVS sinks, it's less congested because we have less people, and it's more economically efficient because there are less people are traveling. But there's a risk of health and environment. We need to invest more on environmental resiliency, and also invest in more in housing because we don't have much of housing choices. Policies would be related to resiliency, green space, social distancing, and then normalizing the green transportation. So that's the overall process of the pathways to the future, which we completed. The fourth phase is what we intend to do in the future, which is basically application of the pathways to the future process in different Plan RVA program areas. And that applicability could be of three levels. So first one could be just for education and awareness. So we know we have these four scenarios, and we just wanted to let you know also, once we finished this thread, we had a question, a poll question to the thread participants, in which we asked whether the four scenarios are plausible enough or not for the future. And we got a response of around 82% that people said that it is highly plausible. So based on that feedback, we can say that we can use all these scenarios in the future. So the first level of applicability is just to use this as an education. So we can say that these are all different futures which we can have. We can see that as an early warning. We can share that understanding and impacts on this different regional, national, and global trends, and also the impact on that particular program area within Plan RVA. The second step, level of applicability, is a little bit higher than that. So we actually use those scenarios and the outcome for vision setting or exploration. So basically, vision setting is if you have a preferred scenario, then you develop that vision. But if you have more than one scenario, more than one future, so you can't just set up a vision. In that case, you do that kind of exploration for those things. So it can provide a benchmark for ongoing strategic planning areas like transportation, housing, emergency management, economic development, and environment. And it could help in developing the vision and the strategic direction for those plans and programs. And then the final stage of applicability is basically the action implementation, in which we basically identify policy and project based on the exercise which you have just done. And that could be done in the long-range transportation plan, which I'll be talking about later as well. So that's for phase 4, which is coming. But before I ask for your approval, I just wanted to reiterate the purpose and the aspiration for the Pathways to the Future process. So it has multifold purposes and aspirations. So the first purpose is to stress test different futures. So I think we did that. We did a good job on that. We developed 4 scenarios plus the baseline. We developed the narrative, we looked at the outcomes, and we also looked at a little bit what the policies might be needed in all these different kind of scenarios. To use the outcomes, so basically the performance measures in ongoing various planning activities in transportation or environment, so use those performance measures, maybe project scoring, those kind of things. The third one is to develop an analytical toolkit, so the models, which can be used in short-term as well as long-term predictive analysis, not only at the regional level, but at a smaller level, TAZ level, as well as a jurisdiction level. So this can be done not only for long-term, but short-term predictive analysis as well. So I'll give you a few examples in which we can use that. So, reconnecting Jackson Ward in Richmond is one of the projects we talk about. Based on, we can look at what would be the health impact of reconnecting Jackson Ward based on all the models and outcome of this process. Similarly, we can also know what would be the economic impact of green city development in Henrico, or maybe a casino coming in Richmond, which we have talked about a lot of times. We can also see the accessibility benefits if we develop provide pathway extension in Chesterfield. That is something which we do from this model as well. And then finally, giving an example from environment, if we develop a new subdivision in Charles City County, we can look at what would be the daily impact of pollution loading or the pollutant loading in Chesapeake Bay based on the major subdivision, based on our nutrition loading model. So all of these can be looked at a smaller level as well, not just the regional level. And then finally, what I'm asking the TAC is basically 2 things. So the first one is to recommend the policy board to adopt the Pathways to the Future scenario planning process as presented. And then second is basically to recommend the policy board to authorize staff to use the tools and scenarios developed in the Pathways to the Future process for any long-range regional transportation study or plan. So with the agenda, there were 2 documentation. One was the process documentation, which was sent as a link, and then more public-facing document, which is the executive summary, was also attached with the agenda. So with that, I'm open to any questions, concerns, comments. But that is the request action I'm asking the TAC to.
Thank you so much for that information. Lots of information. I know I was listening in as Richmond. We actually, and I was looking at it, we're doing our scenario planning after our strategic plan was developed. So I'm pretty excited to see it makes you scary to think about the projects that'll have to go through these very intricate processes, and we really can now see into the future what impacts it may have on our community, in spite of what our localities may want. So I think it's definitely going to be an eye opener and a plus and a minus for those that are getting really used to as we begin to better predict the impacts of the projects that we decide to do in our localities. So again, I think that with this, what we would be approving is a really, it's solidifying those 4 types of scenarios that are described here in front of you, as well as those indices or those metrics that really tie up all of those measures and saying how we actually move the needle and say what impacts these projects will have. So I think that that's been very well put together. And so again, he's also asking that once we approve this plan, that again, those scenarios will be applied to the long range transportation plan study that's going to be coming up next over the next 2 years to complete. And so with that, I would ask, do we have a motion on concurrence and recommending that we adopt the pathways to the future today, as well as recommend to the policy board to use this as a, to use the tools and the scenarios for the long range transportation plan. So before I'll take a motion, I have a hand up with Miles.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to chime in one thing on this side. You know, with approval, we would be able to use the tools and the modeling as part of the LRTP. But I did want to reiterate, and still I was going to get to this in the next presentation, that the LRTP has its own advisory committee. So how we apply these models and how we use the tools and which the performance measures and indices we look at, that's all decided through part of that process. The goal of this is to be able to use this set of models that we've developed and all the performance that comes out of it, that the TPO invested in, because this was funded through the RSTP program, to further our planning efforts. So just wanted to make that clear that there is still additional review from TAC on how we're using it. It's not an all or nothing approval today.
Yeah, thank you for that, because I definitely was trying to make sure I scared them with the point of, you know, this is an important decision, but thank you for adding that we will have the ability to really hone in on which of those factors we put into that LRTP that we like as a region. So thank you for that clarification.
And I would just like to say that it is just one of the tools which we'll be using. So it's, again, the final decision, which is coming out from the long-range transportation plan. The fruit of long-range transportation plan is the projects that the final decision is going to be by the LRTP advisory committee and the policy board. So this is just one of the tools.
Thank you. Barb?
So the last time we did the long range plan, we used measures that were similar to Smart Scale, kind of to evaluate our project list. So we may use that or a combination of the scenario planning. That's sort of what you're saying. We've got some options.
So there's 2 things. One is, so we already have a set of performance measures which we used. So we would reevaluate those this time with the LRTP advisory committee. Some of the performance measures which we developed in this process can also be used, cannot be used as well. So that's one thing. The other thing is we normally evaluate the long-range transportation plan as a project in the future, right? In 2050, looking at the future conditions. So the baseline, that was one of the conditions which we used. For this one, based on how and we haven't finalized how we are going to use it, we might use more than one baseline. So we might use all these different scenarios. We might actually score a project in all these different scenarios.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Do we have a motion? I'm looking at this agenda.
Madam Chair, this is Amy. I just wanted
Hey.
to thank you for all this great work. This is really an amazing process that you guys have been going through, and I think this is very admirable what you have done, and I think it's definitely going to chart a new path forward as it relates to how we're, scoring and viewing our transportation projects. So I just want to say thank you for all your hard work with this.
Thank you, Amy.
So Amy, is that a motion to move this?
Yes, ma'am. That's a good long motion to, yes, that's a motion to approve this.
Thank you. Two-part approval. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Mr. Vidonis. All right, we have a motion and a second. Do I have any directions on voice or?
This could be a voice vote.
Awesome. Let's do a voice vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, please say nay. Perfect. Thank you so much. That is approved. Very good work. This is so exciting. All right. So, Sal, what are you talking about on the 2050 long range transportation plan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This presentation would be relatively short. So basically, I'm talking about it's time for the next long range transportation planning update. So I'll basically talking about the general scope of work, the schedule, and the advisory committee. So most of you already know what the LRTP is, but for someone who doesn't know about it, the long range transportation plan is one of the significant decision tool and a dynamic document that projects the really significant transportation needs in the Richmond region for 20 years and beyond. So the process develops a vision and goals for the Richmond region, but also uses those visions and goals to apply those visions and goals for transportation projects through a process of project prioritization. The end result of the long range transportation plan is a cost constrained list of projects. So the long range transportation plan, constraint plan is important because to get any federal or state dollars, the project needs to be in the LRTP. I think that's a requirement. If the project is not in the LRTP, we normally need to amend the LRTP for that project to be in the LRTP so that we can ask for additional federal and state funds. The LRTP needs to be updated every 5 years to remain consistent with the existing conditions and to reevaluate the plans, the programs, the projects, as well as the regional priorities. The long range transportation plan is due by October 2026. The previous long range transportation plan, Connect RVA 2045, expires midnight of October 4th. So we have a little bit more than 2 years to finish this process. And just want to iterate this, that the federal Code of Federal Regulation requires this long-range transportation planning process to be developed by the MPO. The Code of Virginia also supports it. It's one of the core products of the MPO. So who are we developing this long-range transportation plan? So the long-range transportation plan is basically for the users of the Richmond region's transportation systems. So that is almost everybody, all the residents of the Richmond region. We could exclude some of the institutionalized population like inmates, but other than that, it's for all people. It is also for people who pass through our region. So if you are taking I-64, crossing our region, or you are taking I-95, going from south to north, or you're taking Amtrak or any other thing, it's for those users as well, because we need to make a seamless transportation system, not only for the state of Virginia, but for the national travel as well. And then finally, this is also for goods and freight movement. So transportation planning is not just for people, it's for freight as well. So it's for goods and freight movement, which is within our region, which is coming to our region, going out of region, or passing through our region as well. And also this long-range transportation plan is for the implementers of transportation projects. Basically you, it's for you. It's for the localities. It's for VDOT, it's for DRPT, it's for GRTC, and as well as for CVTA. So LRTP scope of work, this is a very general scope of work which we had provided in the agenda packet. So the LRTP is divided into 8 tasks or phases. The first and the second phases have already been completed. The first phase is basically developing of the baseline data, which the board approved last year. The second phase is basically the pathways to the future process, scenario analysis, which I just talked about. The third phase is the strategic direction, in which we develop a vision, the guiding principles, the goals for the plan, the objectives, the performance measures in which we score projects. That is all done in phase 3. Phase 4 is basically doing a comprehensive transportation needs analysis of the region. We looked at all the transportation issues, whether it be congestion, safety issues, equity issues, all those different issues over all modes and all jurisdiction, and we develop an inventory of those issues. The fifth phase is developing project based on those issues. So basically, the needs is not projects, so needs can be solved by different projects. So if we have a congestion need, it could be solved by simply adding a lane, but it could be solved by having a park and ride near that location. It could be solved by TDM, or it could be solved by transit. So there are different options. So we'll develop the universe of projects based on the needs, working with VDOT, working with the localities, and finalizing that universe of regionally significant project. The sixth phase is basically project prioritization. So we have those different projects, but the funding as we develop, we look at the budget for the long-range transportation plan for 2050. And based on that budget, I'm sure that we would have a lesser budget than the actual needs for the project. So we need to develop a project prioritization process and actually score those projects and rank them, and then get your approval as well as board approval to get that constraint list of projects. Finally, as there's a code requirement, we need to do the evaluation of the plan. The air quality conformity is one of the things which we need to do. The other things like the equity analysis, we need to do the accessibility analysis. We also look at different things like the economic impact of the projects, the transportation change in transportation system, those kind of things. We look at plan evaluation. And then finally, the adoption of the plan, which is phase 8. The LRTP has a robust public engagement, which is still in development. So the overall strategies of developing the public engagement would be headed by our community engagement manager working with CTAC. But the overall phases of the LRTP is tied up with the overall public engagement strategies. So so that the public understand the different phases, we have actually named the different phases differently rather than what I just mentioned. So for the baseline development, we call it how does the future look like? For scenario analysis, we are calling it what if there is more than one possible future? For strategy direction, what matters most for the future? For the transportation needs analysis, what are the transportation issues to be addressed? Then what are the options? For project prioritization and development of constraint plan, how can we realistically get there? And then for evaluation, how did we do that? So each phase has a formal review period. Phase 1 and 2 are already complete. So basically 3, 4, 5, 6, and 8, 6, 7, and 8 have all a formal public review period, which is normally 15 days for all phases and 30 days for the final adoption phase. But we have a general public outreach within all phases, which basically starts with the process. The major public outreach would be in phases 3 and 4, in which we'll be talk about what matters most and what are the transportation issues. So we'll share what the goals are, what the previous goals were with us, what the public wants to see as a transportation vision for the Richmond region, the different goal priority areas. That would be for phase 3, as well as for the transportation issues. We'll go into different communities, as well as we'll have those different maps, online maps in which people can actually point out what the issues they are facing. So phases 3 and 4 would be the major engagement process in this process. Phase 5, which is basically development of the projects, it's more of engineering stuff. So we won't have much of a general outreach at that phase. But for phase 6, we are thinking of giving the public some kind of say in developing the funding scenarios, which we want to do this time as well. And then obviously in plan adoption, there's going to be a whole lot of outreach. We'll actually go into different localities. We also intend to present the long range transportation plan in your board meetings as well. And then finally, the advisory committee. So the long range transportation advisory committee provides the input and oversight in the development of the 2050 long range transportation plan. It would have the autonomy to make decisions, guiding the process and outcomes. So the composition is basically locality representatives, regional, state, and federal transportation partners, and representative from special interest groups. So all TAC, so basically it's all TAC members. I'm requesting all TAC members to be there. If you can make it, you can have a designee, a few CTAC members as well. So not the CTAC members from the localities, from at-large organizations. And then others representing special interest groups like the disabled population or the youth group, those kind of groups. We'll have that. So we are anticipating a 15 to 18 meetings over a course of 2 years. A couple of meetings, including the kickoff meeting, would be in person, but I would think that most of the meetings would be virtual, but some meetings would be in person. So the TAC action requested is basically to recommend the policy board to approve the long range transportation planning scope of work, which is pretty general, to serve as a general guidance to staff and the LRTP advisory committee. So it gives that 8 phases and lays out a little bit detail on that, but it doesn't give much of a detail, but that would be discussed in the LRTP advisory group. And the second part is actually asking the policy board to establish the long range transportation plan advisory committee for the purpose of providing input and oversight for the development of the long range transportation plan. And I think that's all I have. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Does anyone have any questions? Hearing none, do we have a motion to recommend to the policy board for approval to approve the 2050 long range transportation plan scope of work and schedule, as well as the establishment of a LRTP advisory committee?
I'll make a motion to recommend approval.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Karen Smickler, second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. I do believe a voice vote will work. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. Awesome. Those items have been approved.
Thank
Item
you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your great work. Item 12, I am going to ask that we condense this. Do any of our agencies have any breaking news they would like to share? I know Tiffany had to jump off and left hers. I don't know, everybody had theirs kind of written out, and you want to send it in the chat to the group. But just for the lieu of time, any of the agencies, DRPT, GRTC, or Ride Finders, VDOT?
Post ours in the chat for GRTC.
Thank you.
I'll send ours to Janice to make sure it distributes to you guys. The only thing I did want to say is SUPS reviews are coming up. You'll start to see those for your smart scale applications in the not too distant future. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Sarah.
And Janice has ride finders and it'll be in the minutes when she brings those up.
Yes.
Thank y'all so much. Just trying to keep our days moving. I have a lot more today to do. All right, item 13, just to remind you that the Plan RVA newsletter, the Better Together Connector, is in our agenda item. If you want to click on that and view that. Is there anything, Janice, that you want to say about that or refer everyone to look at it?
Now, just try to take a look at it and let us know if you have any questions or if you have any ideas for things we might include.
Awesome. All right, moving to item 14, TAC member comments. Any of our members have any comments? Great, hearing none. Our next meeting is September the 10th, 2024 at 9 a.m. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.